Before they go head-to-head on the field on August 31st, Miami Hurricanes and Florida Gators are going head-to-head for a high-profile recruiting flip.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, writer for allhurricanes.com, and co-host of Locked On ACC. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're about to be joined by the recruiting overlord, and every time he hops on, he's brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. The Overlord is here, and on this episode, we will talk about a new rule that's passed. Some people don't like this. I like it. I think Miami likes it. College football analysts are now allowed to provide on-field instruction. You've got multiple new crystal ball predictions for Miami to land certain top players in the class of 2025. And we're going to start with a possible flip that Miami is battling UF for. We've got Brian Smith with us. Brian, how are you, sir?
Doing well. We are in the middle now, finally, of all the commitments, and I'm quite honestly about ready for it to be done.
It's fun. Every time, and I had this conversation with Larry Bluestein, I've had it multiple times, people are like, oh, what do you talk about on your shows during the off season? I'm like, off season, summer is prime time, man, when it comes to college football recruiting. So, one of the best safeties in the country, Hylton, goes by Drake Stubbs, Jacksonville Mandarin High School, which is really a hotbed when it comes to high profile kids within the northern part of the state of Florida. Hylton Stubbs has been committed to USC. The sentiment seems to be growing, Brian, that Stubbs' USC commitment is not going to stick. And you have described this to me now as a Miami Hurricanes versus Florida Gators tug of war to flip Stubbs from that USC commitment. What's the latest?
When I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago at OT7, I asked him point blank, hey, you're going to take any other visits? And I had no idea. It was just open-ended. And he said, yeah, it'll be Florida and it'll be Miami, and that's it. He was just boom, boom, that's done. It's ironic because his brother is a walk-on at FSU. So I thought that would be the first school he'd mentioned. Apparently I was wrong. But he just took the OV to UM. Florida's involved. That's the school he grew up rooting for. There's all kinds of weird things going on here. Number one thing, though, I just don't think he's going to SC. Like most kids from the East, they just don't want to finalize and go through that. Call me whatever you want, but I'm a guy that just follows the tea leaves over years and just charts this. SC loses somebody every year. They get committed early, then they flip to Georgia or Florida or Miami, whatever. This is going to be another one. Look for the Canes or look for the Gators for Mr. Stubbs.
And for people looking for those clues, and these recruits, power to them. They like to try to provide different clues and red herrings. So Stubbs is at the Rivals 5-star event. He's trying to earn that 5th star, and saw some video interviews with him yesterday. He's got Miami wristbands on, Brian. I don't get too crazy over this stuff, but people are interested. So obviously Stubbs is trying to drop some clues to the Canes fans. You guys are in it.
Yeah, I love that because I always ask kids on the sidelines of games, the gloves are the big thing with DBs and receivers and stuff. Sometimes it's a big deal to a kid. It represents what's going on in recruiting. Other times he's like, yeah, I just grabbed these gloves. It's really random. So it may be something that matters because Stubbs had a really good visit to UM. So they're probably on his mind. Good for them. I'm sure you got some gear. You might as well go ahead and rock it.
And obviously this is a player who would not be on either Miami's campus or Florida's campus until 2025. But these teams go head to head on the field in about 6 weeks, Brian. Now, whether he ends up at Miami or Florida, what type of a player is Drake Stubbs?
Best known for his ability to jump routes. He's an aggressive free safety that plays downhill. The game I saw him last year was against Monarch in South Florida. He had 2 picks that were both spectacular. This is a young man that's aggressive. He comes down and he goes after picks and gets great hands, has size 6'2", 6'3". He's going to come in with the frame that you look at and say, okay, that's an FBS guy, and that's also a power 4 guy. He's not as tall as a certain guy that left Miami from last year at safety. I mean, he's not 6'5", but he's 6'3". And he's also a guy that probably looks about the best of any safety in the country on the hoof, just physical traits. And he's a great kid, too. So I think he would fit into any locker room. So chance to play early wherever he goes.
Yeah. Let's talk about my favorite offensive lineman in the class, SJ Alofaituli. 6'3", 290 pounds, standout out of Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas. I think this guy could end up being Miami's center for the future if he winds up coming to the Canes. Crystal ball predictions, Brian. More of them are starting to come in for SJ to Miami. Do you think the Hurricanes can get this one over the finish line?
This is probably the first center, if I remember correctly, Alex, that UM went after in this cycle. And I've seen him last year at Under Armour combines and stuff like that, but like everybody offered this kid by the end of his sophomore year. He was definitively the number 1 interior offensive lineman in the country, plays at arguably the best program over the last couple of years in high school football, and it just shows. He's very mature, strong, he's got great technique. Miami got on him really early, though, and they made a bond with him. So this is another Cristobal special where he teamed up with his buddy, Alex Mirabal. I thought they were going to get him 6 months ago, but he doesn't talk much.
Right.
So it's been really hard. Getting intel on a West Coast kid's not easy for me anyway, but the crystal balls are a good sign. I don't even know who number 2 would be. That's the question.
Mm-hmm.
Like his buddy, I believe, just committed to Michigan, if I remember right, the big offensive tackle. But that school's recruited by everybody. If you don't recruit Bishop Gorman, there's something wrong with you. So I'm curious what school would even be number 2 on his list, but I think it's a Miami deal.
Now, there's a defensive lineman that I'm sure you've covered on the Auburn side as well. One of the many teams that Brian covers in recruiting, in addition to Miami, are the Auburn Tigers. And not too long ago, it seemed like 3-star edge rusher Herbert Scroggins out of Savannah, Georgia, 6'2", 235, seemed like he was an Auburn lock. And now folks who had him pegged to Auburn are starting to flip those predictions to Miami, including Steve Wiltfong. Do you think Herbert Scroggins is going to end up at the U?
If Wiltfong said something happened, that's a sign. Everything that I was told, I live up in Auburn now. Like this is going to be a kid they get. I was told that over a week ago. He's coming to Auburn, blah, blah, blah. Then everything just stopped. Like when it was the date, it just kept getting backed up. Took the visit to Miami. Then it just went dead silent. I'm like, what's going on? And then Gabby and Wiltfong and different people are talking about had a great trip. I think at the very minimum, Miami is now the leader. Question is, will he make an announcement? He hasn't, to my knowledge, thrown out a date. Hey, I'm going to commit on. So that's the key. I'm sure Auburn and Miami are battling. That's just the nature of the beast. But like you said, Auburn was the definitive leader. They thought they had him in the bag. So something's changed, and the only thing that happened is he took the UM visit. So congrats to Miami for getting his attention.
One of the most important recruits in this cycle from Miami. We've talked about him so much. Chris Ewald Jr. Georgia's making a push for the 4-star corner out of Chaminade-Madonna. He's scheduled to make his decision tomorrow. Can Miami beat the Dogs for this one? We'll talk about it with the recruiting overlord when we come back. Folks, we are only getting started. You want to keep it locked on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Folks, there's a reason, really about a dozen reasons why the Game Time app. It is the only ticket app that I use. I'm getting incredible deals, convenient features, and I'm getting the best prices. That's the bottom line at Game Time. We all love going to Major League Baseball games during the summer. You won't believe how cheap Marlins ticket. Well, maybe you would believe it, but if you're deciding, should I go to the movies or should I go to a Marlins game, you're going to pay about a third of that price to go to a Marlins game these days. Guys, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. And it's not just sporting events at Game Time. Concerts, musical theater, comedy show. You can find tickets to anything on the Game Time app. Guys, save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. I love the panoramic views from your seat that you get in the app before you buy, and I love the all-in pricing. They show you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, Create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Folks, the Locked On Network has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming YouTube channel. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV Channels app. It's called Locked On Sports Today, and it's here for you, covering 24/7 the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Brian Smith is with us, who, by the way, is also my colleague at allhurricanes.com. So make sure you check out our work there, covering the Canes 24/7. So, Brian, there's been a lot of smoke in recent days that Georgia is really trying to, kind of a last-minute deal, I guess, recruiting Chris Ewald, 4-star cornerback out of Chaminade-Madonna in South Florida, who's, the projections have been pointing Ewald to Miami for a long time. A lot of the recruiting experts are a little bit baffled by which way this is going to go. There could be a 50-50 type of deal now between the hometown Canes or the Georgia Bulldogs for Chris Ewald. There's even been some chatter. This has not happened, at least not at the point we're having this conversation, been some chatter about maybe him pushing back his commitment announcement. That has not happened yet. Ewald is scheduled to announce tomorrow night, Thursday night. Do you think it's going to be the Canes or the Dogs?
If you'd have asked me 7 days ago, I'd have said Canes, but everything here in the last 48 hours suggests that it really is a coin toss, which means Georgia's made up room. I don't like it when that happens. And the other thing is, we've thought Miami forever. We've talked about him numerous times on this show. I have pause now because Gabby and everybody else even thinks this is really too close to call. That's not a good sign. Georgia had a great visit, and that's an easy place to sell. For those of you who don't know, I don't know how you wouldn't if you're a college football fan. But if this happens immediately, I don't like Miami's chances as much. Maybe he's just trying to throw a smoke screen. Kids do that. But Georgia side thinks that there's a chance here. So I don't know. I think the longer this goes, the better it is for Miami because it's the local school. And Ewald even told me, I talked to you a few weeks ago, like, I don't like to travel much. These are only 2 visits I'm going to take. And I'm like, oh. He's going to go to Miami. He's from Broward. It's pretty easy. Well, apparently I'd used logic, and that's not a good idea with recruits. But it's hard, man. 17-year-olds make a lot of interesting decisions. And I don't know what the NIL money is for each school and all that. There's a lot of things involved, but this seems to be one that could go either direction.
Yeah, this is not only, he's a tremendous football player, Ewald, but also, the importance of Miami recruiting for a pipeline school like Chaminade. That makes this one extra important. He's obviously not the only really good cornerback that Miami is involved in recruiting right now. In fact, another one, Brian, who's not an in-city or even in-state kid, who's really my radar has gone up on Jabari Antoine, who's right in LSU's backyard, another 4-star cornerback. Recently decommitted from LSU. I know you were surprised by that. And I don't know, Miami might be the favorite now. Maybe Miami's Cajun coordinator can take him right out of Cajun territory.
For those that don't know, Dennis Smith and both the coordinators at UM are from the state of Louisiana. So there's direct connection to the Bayou. That being stated, Antoine is from literally an hour from Baton Rouge. It's just, that area, everything is like you go by streets, go down businesses, they're purple and gold. I mean, come on. Everybody supports that school. He committed early. He was a priority target. They need corners, everything. Oh, he's just going to go to LSU. Well, Miami, Florida State, and a bunch of other schools have gotten involved, and he decommitted. Miami would pull a huge coup by getting this kid on campus, let alone signing him. This is awesome for them. You have to pull a few of these kind of recruiting landside wins. If you're going to get up over the top and beat Georgia, Ohio State, you need some of these kids. And he's a long corner, very athletic. He could play early. I will still be surprised because just going by history, this is the kid that just goes to LSU, no matter what you do. Right. But he's taken multiple visits now. There's something wrong in Baton Rouge. Like, I watched their spring game, and their defense was awful again. Maybe he just doesn't think that's the place for him. And Miami's D was legit last year. The thing they need is a lockdown corner to get over the top. He might be that guy.
Yeah, no doubt about that. So another defensive player will go back near the line of scrimmage for this one. Miami is getting predictions now to land 4-star defensive lineman Jarquez Carter out of Newberry, Florida, which I didn't know where Newberry was. Brian just told me off the air, and there's obviously that makes this even more interesting. But Newberry, Florida, 6'2", 270-pound Jarquez Carter. Are you hearing that same buzz, Brian? And I don't think you and I have talked about this player before on this show.
He's a really good kid. Nice guy. Excellent student. Newberry, for those who don't know, is about 30 minutes outside of Gainesville. So obviously you would think UF would be the easy pick. I'm not sure how much they went after him early, if at all. I don't think FSU went after him. So when a kid from the central to north part of the state doesn't get one of those two schools immediately, then anything can happen. One point, Penn State, Notre Dame, he's had all kinds of schools involved, but Miami's had him on campus multiple times. It seems like that's what's trending. It's just ironic. Again, he could just about ride his bicycle to UF. So it's just ironic. Up the field, one gap defensive lineman. He fits the old school Miami from the the 80s and 90s.
Right.
He is an attacker, downhill guy, very athletic. Miami would do well. They need at least one guy like this in every class. Here you go. Plus, he's an in-state guy, which Mario likes.
Now, Chris Ewald is not the only player who's on Miami's radar who's going to be making an announcement this week. On Friday, we're going to hear an announcement from 3-star defensive lineman Derry Norris, 6'3", 265, out of Spruce Creek High School in Port Orange, Florida. Last time we talked about him, you just mentioned great player, not really at the best high school when it comes to showcasing his talents. That's not really the high-profile type of program that gets a lot of these players noticed. So with that effect, do you think Derry Norris, is he underrated in your eyes, number one? And then number two, do you think Miami gets this one over the finish line?
Everything points towards Miami. And for those that don't know, Spruce Creek is just north of Daytona. It's not nothing wrong with the pro. It's just not a lot of scouts are going to go there. They're just not. Right. So I didn't even know who he was until this cycle really got going. That says something. I knew about one of his teammates who's committed to Pittsburgh, but he's a DB. This is an interesting kid, though. Love his frame, love his athleticism. If he played at Orlando Jones or Miami Northwestern, it'd be different. He's just not at the right school for exposure. I don't know much about their coaching staff, but he can play. I'm just curious, does it end up a strong side end or 3-tech or both? He's 265 now, so I assume it's going to be 3-tech. Most guys gain 20 to 40 pounds in college. Man, I'll take the athleticism every time. Miami, they got on him pretty early. They did their own evaluation. It's one of the kids I heard about. I'm like, okay, who's this guy? Like, nobody else has talked about him, but Miami went after him, and obviously Mario's made it clear. We're trying to be a line of scrimmage team like an SEC program. They're trying to get as many D linemen as possible. Last year, would they take 8? And they're still prioritizing it again this year. Somebody leaves, they don't care. They know they got to change the trenches, and they've done a great job of it. This is the kind of guy that Miami used to get, again, just like with Jarquez, up the field, athletic, can change directions, has a lot of upside.
Now, within the past week, Miami's landed 2 players from Miami Central, which I'll use the word pipeline again. That's a really important recruiting pipeline. Now, late last week, you and I, we did talk a little bit about Amari Wallace already. So I encourage people to check out our conversation from last week. But I'd love your scouting report on linebacker Ezekiel Myles, who Miami landed on Sunday.
Rare player in the sense that he's a 3-down backer. Everybody needs him. But unlike guys that weigh 205 or thereabouts, he can really change direction and all that. That's great. But he can play downhill. He is a bull. I love the way he hits. I love the way he attacks the hole in the run game. And I think on 3rd and 7, you can leave him in the game. That's the key. I believe he's a little underrated because he's not the tallest guy. The measurables are not perfect. He's somewhere around 6 foot. I could care less. He can play football and he can cover. So that's a very unique football player. And again, being at Central helps. I'm glad he's getting a chance to go to a major program. I don't think he's been ranked quite as high as he should have been.
We still have a lot to talk about here with Brian Smith, including a class of 2026 quarterback who's really been trending towards Miami, plus this new rule that analysts who were previously relegated to off-the-field roles, if you're an analyst, break down film, game plan, not allowed to actually coach, now they are. What the impact is going to be. You guys want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. Guys, if you want to take your everydayer experience to the next level, sign up for our exclusive SMS texting service called Locked On Canes Insiders. I include a link in the show description below. You become a Locked On Canes Insider. You get text messages from my phone to yours, breaking news, recruiting scoops. I ask you guys, sometimes I put out the bat signal for questions that we do for Q&A shows. Try it free for 14 days. Click that link below. Become a Locked On Canes Insider. That if you like it, after 2 weeks, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We give you a lot of added value on there on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat. Brian Smith is the ultimate insider. Brian, Miami's trying to get their quarterback for 2026 because they've been coming off the board like dominoes, the 2026 quarterbacks. It's crazy how many of these guys are popping. And one that Miami seems to be really interested in, and I think the interest is mutual, is Daren Coleman from Jones High School in Orlando, which is a great Central Florida program. He's camped at Miami a couple times within just the past month. He's been on campus a lot. Is Daren Coleman the real deal?
Accurate, consistent, makes post-snap reads, has a level of maturity you don't see with a lot of kids going into their junior year of high school, and just a nice guy to be around. He can run too. He's not just a pocket guy. He prefers it, but he can take off and move and not just get outside the pocket and throw. He can pick up some yards. So the only knock on him is he's 160 pounds, 165 pounds. He's got to get bigger, but he's got 2 years of high school to do that. But the arm, the natural throwing motion, all those things, it's very fluid. Can't go wrong with it.
So I want to talk about this new rule the Division I Council voted in favor of this week. Analysts, right? I mean, analysts have been around for a long time. Nick Saban was the one who really made the analyst role famous because he kept hiring these like big name coaches, come join my staff as an analyst. And so up until this point, Brian, analysts were strictly forbidden, according to NCAA rules, not to provide any on-field instruction. Like you're not actually allowed to like coach players up in practices or games. You're there to break things down, film study, game plan, and all that. They've now reversed course on this. Analysts are now allowed to coach. Now, there's two schools of thought on this. I did have a conversation with Kenton Gibbs, who's a former Division I player, played defensive line at NC State, and he was not in favor of this because his concern, valid one, is having like too many cooks in the kitchen, like being coached up by too many different people in practice. I think that's a great player perspective. Now, another perspective is this is something, Brian, I've seen this happen in recent years. I don't know if you've experienced this. This is a real thing. During all these years where analysts are not allowed to coach on the field, and it's an NCAA violation if you do, there's this weird petty game that happens behind the scenes where coaches from other schools will try to obtain any visual evidence possible, right? Films taken, a reporter sends something out, any evidence possible of analysts on the field coaching up players. And then those coaches from other programs will report those to the NCAA to try to get their rival teams punished. It happens all over the place, extremely petty. And I think a lot of coaches are happy now that you can take that pettiness off the table with this new rule.
It is petty, and everybody has had analysts for as long as I can remember, coaching in practice, whether you want to hear it or not, doing whatever. Let's get this out of the way. There's a 20-hour rule in college football that is a complete joke. Teams don't practice 20 hours. So especially quarterbacks, if you practice 20 hours a week as a quarterback, you will be cut because there's zero chance you can remotely be in the stratosphere. 40 is like a minimum. That's just reality. Football in 20 hours just doesn't work. It's too hard a sport. So that's why the analysts are there, because the coaches can't be in 100 places at once, especially with like the younger guys on the scout team and stuff. I think it's a great rule for that. It's how it's used. Kenton's point is right. If you get guys trying to get involved with play calling, there still needs to be a tier here, but especially with like special help with special teams, making sure you don't have too many or too few guys on the field. Lots of little things these analysts can do during a game. I'm all for it. How many times have we said, why do they have 10 guys on the field? Stupid stuff like that. That if you've got all these analysts, if you want to yell starting this year, really yell, because your team should never be in that circumstance. Somebody will still do it, but that's another story. I think it's good overall, though. Give these guys a reason to be around to continue in, because college football is losing a lot of good coaches because they hate NIL and they hate the transfer portal, period. This is a way to keep some guys around, too, that may have tried to take some little small job in the NFL, gives them more opportunity.
Yeah, and also like coaching the on-field staffs, I think were too small anyway. I think the rule was too restrictive, where a lot of programs have had to basically not have a designated special teams coach just because the staffs were limited at, I think it was 11. So it's like, at least now you can have, more hands-on work with special teams, or, maybe you're, for some schools, maybe you were kind of limited on the instruction your quarterbacks can get. Because like you said, being a polished quarterback in major college football, it requires a lot more than those 20 hours a week. So there are definitely positives to this. And listen, from my point of view, Miami has a lot of analysts and a lot of really good analysts. So I think this is definitely a good thing from a Miami point of view. I mean, think about it, Brian, a couple years ago, Jason Taylor was an analyst, right? So, I mean, can you imagine having a guy like that? He's now a defensive line coach, so he is an on-field guy. But a couple years ago, Jason Taylor was an off-field guy at Miami. So you're saying we've got this Pro Football Hall of Famer, and he's not allowed to give on-field instruction. It's ridiculous. So Miami and others can definitely benefit from this.
Yeah, I'm glad they're going with it. If nothing else, they can make other small changes to it. But I don't see how it's not going to work if the schools are smart about how they use them. It's more resource.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Well, great stuff as always here by Brian Smith. You want to make sure you follow him on X at FBScout_Florida. Check out his work at allhurricanes.com. I got some stories I'll be cooking up there a little bit later on today, so make sure you check it out, allhurricanes.com. We'll talk to you next time. By the way, tomorrow, Luke Nickel is going to come on the show. So we're going to talk with Luke about his Elite 11 experience, where he did very well, about his recent Miami official visit. So join us then on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.